Well, welcome to the 2019 PCIARC Annual Summit. The goal of this summit is to let you know what we've been up to over the last year. But another main goal of it is to receive from you some feedback. So this is your summit. We're here to hear from you and interact with you and get questions and good questions, and hopefully we have some answers for you. If not, we'll get the answers for you and get back to you. Now, my name is Jeffrey Martin. I'm the Deputy Director of the Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity Office, and we have a lot of HERO people in the house. If you work in HERO, please raise your hand. Come on. Yeah. Well, I want to thank them before because they helped set this up, so thank you very much. And we have our new interim director here, Tony Newborn, who's by the door. I don't know why she's standing by the door, but she's not leaving. She's got to be here all night. Actually, she's got to put the chairs back up into the other room. So Tony is here. She's going to be here, and she's actually going to be part of the program a little bit later to introduce our mayor, who will be here later this evening to close it out. We have a full agenda for you tonight. We're going to hear you'll know everything there is to know about the PCIARC. I guarantee you won't hold anything back. You also know again what our complaint process is all about and what statistics we've had so far this year. You'll hear about our new mental health unit, the St. Paul PD. You'll hear about our strategic plan, what we plan on working on with the PCIARC in the coming year, and some of those goals. And then we'll do what the most important thing was break out into table discussions, in which you'll try to have someone who's either a PCR commissioner or someone who's part of the HERO staff to be at those tables to capture your thoughts and questions and hopefully answer some of those thoughts. And then we'll have some remarks from our new interim director, and also we'll have some closing remarks by the mayor. So it's going to be a full evening. So hang in there with us. We got plenty of coffee. Might be over some kind of regulation for coffee. Those are two very big things of coffee, so please drink them. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble a little bit later if I take that to the job and they drink it tomorrow. Because we can't waste any of your money. You know that. We can't waste any of your money. So now we're going to ask that our chair, Constance Stuck, come up and please do some introductions for us. So let's welcome Constance Stuck.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really thrilled to see that we have a great turnout tonight, and thank you for taking the time away from your family members and other activities to come and learn more about PCIARC and what we do. I'm going to be talking a little bit more later, but right now I'd like to ask all of our commission members to stand and identify themselves and say what neighborhood or what ward or what district they're from. So if you could all stand and just take your time. We'll start with the vice chair.
Hi, I'm Rachel Sullivan-Nightingale from Ward 10.
And Rachel is the vice chair of the PCIARC. And we'll move over this way.
Hi everybody, my name is Travis Grundy. I am from Ward 7.
Okay.
Good evening everyone, my name is Eric Forstrom. I represent Ward 4.
My name is Kristen Clark, and I also represent Ward 4.
Good evening, I'm Sasha Patton. I'm in Ward 1 in the Summit University neighborhood.
Okay. And one of our commissioners is not here tonight. That is Miss Anika Bowie, and I believe she's Ward 1. Yes, thank you. So I did not want to spend a lot of time with that. I will talk with you more later about our plans and how we do our work, and I will then turn things over to Coordinator Roby. Oops.
Thank you, Chair Tutt. Good evening. My name is Julian Roby. I am the coordinator for the Police Civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission, or the PCIARC for short. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the PCIARC process, and then I'll go through our annual report. So beginning with the intake of a complaint. So complaints can be received through various means, either online, in our HERO office in downtown St. Paul, at one of our community intake centers, or through the Internal Affairs Unit at the St. Paul Police Department. Once that complaint is received, it comes to myself and it's reviewed to make sure it meets the qualifications. Essentially, it has to have a signature and an actual legal name. That complaint is passed along to the Internal Affairs Unit for investigation, after which I send a letter to the complainant notifying them that their complaint has been received and what the next steps of that process are. Internal Affairs then does their investigation, which consists of contacting witnesses, alleged officers, and complainants, collecting and reviewing evidence. Once that investigation is complete, they turn over the completed case file with the evidence, complaint, and officer statements, anything else that might be relevant to the case, and loads these onto these laptops, which are distributed to the commissioners 2 weeks prior to the meeting for deliberations and recommendations for said complaints. So within that, once those laptops are received and distributed to the commission members, I also send another letter to a complainant and the alleged officers, notifying them that their case is coming before the PCIARC and they have an opportunity to provide a statement in which case that if a complainant or an officer comes forward and provides said statement, their case is then tabled, the statement is transcribed, and it allows for the investigation to be stalled for a little while, but it allows for if additional investigation needs to occur or there's some questions that need to be answered based on that statement, that allows for that process to happen. And it really just allows for the complainant and the officer to make a case for what happened, tell their story in their own words before the commission. In the event that an officer or a complainant decides to put forward a statement, the commission reviews the case, they deliberate, they make a recommendation, in which case that recommendation, if it determined that a disposition that's sustained is found, they make a disciplinary recommendation. That recommendation is memorialized, and the chief is then notified with the commission's recommendation, in addition to the Internal Affairs Unit puts forward their recommendation, after which the chief has the final decision-making power in what should happen in said complaint case. In the event that the chief disagrees with the commission's recommendation, the chief notifies myself, who then notifies the chair, and they have 5 business days to have a meeting to come to some rationale like why there might be some discrepancies, in which case the commission and the chief are disagreeing. Once the complaint is in, final discipline has been imposed, and the officer, in the event that a disciplinary action area is imposed, the officer is allowed to go appeal that decision and go through a grievance process. Once that process has played itself out, the complainant is notified that their complaint is closed. The only time this information becomes public on disciplinary action is if a complaint is sustained and discipline is imposed. If not, the complainant is just notified that the complaint is closed. Now I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the annual report. So part of the main reasons why we have these summits is to release summary data to showcase what the commission has done over the last year. In 2018, we saw an uptick in number of cases as well as complaints. So we had 77 allegations that regarded 70 different officers. The commission reviewed 42 cases over 11 meetings. As we can see, that the most common type of allegation was improper procedure. These are the different dispositions that the commission recommended. These are our choices of recommendations. Now, in the event no action is determined by, if the commission by chance comes to a tie vote, then no action is put forward, and the case goes directly to the chief without the commission's recommendation. We can see that most of the complaints became either unfounded or sustained. And again, in the event that a complaint is sustained, it's posed with a disciplinary action is recommended. So of the disciplines that were recommended, the most common type was oral reprimand. Again, it can be, each disciplinary action doesn't necessarily is for one individual officer for a particular case. So, and each case an officer can have multiple different allegations. For instance, so if an officer has 3 different allegations and it's determined that 2 of them are sustained, you're only recommending 1 disciplinary action. So the numbers may look a little off of where you have 19 sustained complaints, but only 17 recommended disciplinary actions. That would be the case why. Our firearm case data, it has a different set of dispositions. It's included in the total number of allegations. However, in the event that it's the disposition choices are either it's justified or not justified, and we also classify what type of firearm discharge it was. In this case, the commission saw one case, and it was an accidental discharge. And as I said earlier, regarding a disagreement between the commission and the chief disagreed with the commission one time in 2018. We also collect demographic data. The HERO department does based on complaints that come in through our office. We saw 57 complaints came directly through the HERO department, in which case we see that it allows us to determine like who's making complaints, how the community is interacting with the police, and really target our outreach on where people may be missing the mark or not understanding this process. Oops. That will conclude our annual report. If we have questions, we'll be able to answer those during the breakout sessions. I will now bring forward Chief Axtell, who will introduce Sgt Sipes for our mental health unit for the St. Paul Police Department. Thank you.
So thank you very much for being here tonight. Really, it's an honor to have this continued partnership go on for so many years, and we seem to get better and more refined each and every year. And as I look out into the audience tonight, I just want to say thank you, Diane Benz, President NAACP St. Paul, and you've been there from ground zero with your service with PCIARC, and really have been a true social justice warrior in our community, and held police accountable, and myself throughout the years as I've grown through the ranks of the police department. So you have been tough, you've been consistent, and you have been wonderful to work with. So thank you so much for your many years of service. Let's give her a round of applause. So members of the commission, Chair Tuck, and HERO employees and workers, fellow workers in the city of St. Paul, and the women and men of the St. Paul Police Department, thank you so much for being here tonight. We also have our Law Enforcement Career Path Academy, which is one of the first things that I was able to start up in my early chief career in 2016, creating conduits between communities in St. Paul who normally may not have had the opportunity to go to law enforcement school and become St. Paul police officers. And as I'd like to have you stand, if you would, so everybody can see the future of the St. Paul Police Department. Please stand. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. So as you can see, just real briefly about the Review Commission, I get to see the work that comes into my office after the work is complete. And overwhelmingly, we agree on what the disposition should be and what the discipline should be. So really, it's good to see that we're in line with, I like to make sure the department is policing and serving our community to community standards. And I really believe the commission represents the community standards, and I'm glad to see for an overwhelming majority of the time we are directly in line with what our community should expect and what the women and men of the St. Paul Police Department and how they should act. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jamie Sipes. Sgt Sipes really has been an incredible addition to starting our mental health unit. Last year we started the mental health unit, again trying to find other paths between law enforcement and communities in crisis. In the past, there have really been only a couple options where how a police officer could handle somebody that's in crisis. One of those options was the hospital, and the other option was jail. Really, that's all there was, and that's not a recipe for success. So we started, the St. Paul Police Department, we started the mental health unit, trying to work with our mental health partners, trying to come up with long-term solutions to problems that really have been, some people in crisis have intersected with criminal justice system and a revolving door within the criminal justice system, and it's a path to nowhere. So we're really proud of the partnership with our mental health community and the St. Paul police officers specially trained in this area. And I would like to introduce Jamie Sipes. Come on up, Jamie. And I have to apologize, I've got a little time and then I've got a family commitment and I'll be in big trouble if I don't get there, so I'll be around for just a little while. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you tonight. I'm very excited about this topic. I think you're going to see that as I do talk. This is a passion of mine. This is not necessarily a job. Chief Axtell didn't point at me and say, Jamie, create this. This is a situation that as I said, I'm passionate about. I'm very excited that our department, and very proud that our department has stepped back and said, how else can we perform some of our duties? How else can we serve the community? And it's about creating a changed response. And that's really what this program's about. So I'm going to apologize up front. I'm long-winded, okay? In this presentation, some of you have seen it before, can go for 30 minutes, and it can go for about 4 hours. But I've been given about 20 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it about there, okay? So if I don't answer all the questions through this presentation, please, during the breakout sessions, come and talk to me, ask, because I love to talk about this stuff. So, that's not right. There we go. So I think one of the biggest questions that I've answered and been asked and I've thought about and even officers ask is why? Why should law enforcement, why should your police department invest resources and energy and police officers and finances to this area that's traditionally not a law enforcement area, right? Why should we invest money and have officers being involved in mental health programming? And I think that's an important question to consider. For me, it comes down to really 3 ideas. One, we're the first to be called. And if you think about that crisis call, something you've seen in the news, for example, somebody's in the middle of the street talking to themselves, won't get out of the way, maybe they're not dressed appropriately. Who should respond to that? Well, when the 911 call comes in, there's a responsibility that public safety responds, right? And sometimes we encounter people that are in crisis or experiencing mental illness. So we need to have the training and we need to partner with the right resources to handle calls like that. Number 2, state law on mental health evaluations. We in Minnesota are empowered in law enforcement to decide when a person needs to be taken to the hospital with or without their consent for a mental health evaluation. Some may say that's not the expertise of police officers, and I would agree. Sometimes we don't have that expertise, and yet we're empowered by the law to make those decisions. Number 3, we're heavily involved in those situations when force is used and sometimes people are injured or unfortunately someone is killed that experiences mental illness, and we're asked a lot of tough questions, and rightfully so. We should be asked those questions and we should be able to answer why this happened. But what we're saying is, if we're going to be involved in those conversations, let's get involved in the conversation before it turns into one of those acute crises. So those are some reasons that I think are important to consider when we ask the question of why should law enforcement be more involved in this. And the 4th one that I don't have up here, and 23 years ago, if you'd asked me this question when I got into law enforcement, police officers, are they involved in customer service? 23 years ago, I might say, I don't think so. I believe we enforce laws, write tickets, arrest people. But now, 23 years later, when I recognize it's more about public service and responding to the changing needs and expectations of the community, that's what this program's about. And so yes, now I believe we are to some degree involved in customer service because we respond to the community's needs and expectations. And what we're hearing across the country in law enforcement is that changed expectation, that changed response to crisis calls, because we know traditional police responses to mental health calls for service or crisis calls for service are sometimes not effective long term. So we want to look at more long-term measures and responses that are going to help people with their health and wellness. That's ultimately going to make the community healthier and safer, I believe. So those are some of the reasons that I think of when I think of why. Why should we invest in this? Yes?
For clarification on number 2, is mental health, or is law enforcement the only agency that can make a recommendation for mental health evaluation to a hospital? Can no one else make that?
Great question. So the question is on number 2, are police officers the only one that have that authority in Minnesota? No, it's some public health officers, and that's defined in a number of different ways. But as you'll see, we partner with licensed clinical social workers because that's a peer, and I say peer because they have the same authority to take custody of a person, to take them to the hospital for a mental health evaluation. So when we partner in some of our programs, we want that same authority so we can talk back and forth, and the police officer can say, this is what I see, and the licensed clinical social worker can say, yes, this is what I see, or no, I think we should consider this. So great question. In Minnesota, it's some public health officers, so not all social workers, and law enforcement. So a little bit more about that law. We kind of we talked a little bit about that, but through the police brain, and if there's any attorneys in the room, I apologize, but for most of us, when we read through a law, we come to the conclusion of an understanding, and through the police brain, when we read through this law, and this is the law that talks about my authority or law enforcement's authority to take custody of somebody, it really comes down to a couple things. Is the person a danger to themselves or others, and is that danger imminent? And if so, I have the authority to take custody of this person with or without their consent and take them to the hospital and use what force is reasonable, up into what is reasonable to do that. So that's the law. And again, we are all very intelligent people in this room, and we all could read this, and what are there, maybe 75 people in this room? We may have 75 different opinions, roughly, of this law, but ultimately it comes down to, for us, is the person a danger to themselves or others, and is it imminent? So that's the law. The statistics, and you may have seen the data, and again, we're talking about why should we invest in this programming. This is the data that we've shared. For those in the back, on the left that's circled is 2006, and on the right is 2016. But these are the mental health calls for service. So these came into the 911 center, and it was clear that it was a mental health call for service. In 2006, it was roughly 4,400, and in 2016, about 8,700. So those numbers almost doubled, right? In 10 years. So, and these are the mental health reports. So an officer goes out maybe to a disturbance call. So it didn't come in as a mental health call, a disturbance call. They get there and they decide, well, there's this mental health component, and they write a report. And in that report, we figure out, okay, this also should be included and considered as a mental health type call. So in 2006, there was about 5,700, and in 2016, over 12,300. So again, what did those numbers do? They over doubled. So basically what this shows us is mental health related calls for service or crisis calls continue to increase. And I think over time, if we were to look at 17, 18, and 19, we would see that they continue to increase. I've been asked, why is that? Well, I don't have the answer, but I think part of it is we have worked so hard as a society to destigmatize mental illness and make it okay to talk about, right? And so we have a better understanding of what crisis and mental illness looks like. And that helps us when we call the police department and provide information for officers to go out to. Officers have received more training and recognize now more that maybe this is criminal activity, right? And we need to deal with the criminal activity, but we've also got this mental health component that we need to also address and trying to figure out which one's most important at the time. So I think that's part of why the numbers are increasing. And again, when tragedy occurs, and rightfully so, the police department should answer questions about how we got here. But again, what we're saying is, if we're going to be engaged in that conversation, let's get involved at the beginning before things turn into a crisis. Let's have a seat at the table there to figure out what else we can do. And the rest of my presentation is about what else we can do, what else we can be involved in. So we formed a mental health work group in St. Paul to say, what else can we be involved in? How are we servicing our community? How are we partnering with our mental health resource community? And what improvements can be made? And we had open ears to hear what else the department could do, what we could change, what are some of the policies we could look at revising. And one of the things was becoming more culturally competent in our language. Some of the terminology that law enforcement has had in their culture, for example, emotionally disturbed person, or EDP, it's just been part of police talk forever, for at least 23 years. And what I heard from NAMI when I met with the executive director was sometimes we start off conversations by insulting people and we don't even know it. And at the time I said, Sue, you don't know me. I would never start a conversation like that. You don't know my background. And she said, well, think about emotionally disturbed person, EDP. And so I started thinking about applying that to my family and the people who have struggled with mental illness in my family. And I thought, well, there is something there. If an officer started that conversation with labeling a family member of mine as an EDP, maybe I would be offended. So we talked about how do we become more culturally competent in the language that our officers speak. And we came to the conclusion that we need to follow NAMI's guidelines by using people first language. And so we changed internally everything away from EDP, and that's no longer part of our culture. And we talk about people first language. So people in crisis, person in crisis. All of our internal policies and procedures were changed to either persons in crisis or responding to individuals in crisis. And I like to stop at crisis for just a second. Now, 1 in 5 of us at some point in our lives will experience some form of mental illness. And if you think about that, there's people in the room right now that are experiencing different things in their life. And maybe it's not mental illness, but maybe it's crisis. And this is what I talk to our officers about. I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be me. But we all can agree, we understand what it's like to feel hurt, or to feel angry, or to feel unloved. And these all lead to crisis. So if we can understand each other by recognizing, I don't know what it's like to be you, you don't know what it's like to be me necessarily, but we can all agree that I understand what it's like to feel this or that. And to me, that's crisis, and that's what this is about. We encouraged officers to start writing more reports, and they immediately responded. If you think about this work we're doing now, in the past we didn't document it, and what we're saying is we need to do better at writing more reports. And I can tell you, we'll get to it in a little bit, but over 1,500 calls last year were referred to our unit. Those would have been calls in the past that because we didn't have this mechanism in our department, they just didn't get documented. Because law enforcement years ago, and in some agencies still, we don't recognize that we have a responsibility with these calls for service. So again, it's about creating that changed response. The goals of our program, again, to meet the changing needs and expectations of the community, to reduce mental health calls for service, to get people engaged with the resources that they need so that they don't need to call the police department. And again, to reduce the stigma related to mental health and mental illness, both internally and externally. It's awesome to have conversations like this with officers who years ago, I can tell you 23 years ago, we didn't check in with each other and say, hey, how you doing? That was a pretty tough call. We see things that most people don't see, and it affects us, whether we want to agree about that or not. So checking in with each other, that's something we didn't used to do, but talking about the stigma helps. So I talk about our mental health resource team. So while this may seem like it's about the police department, it really isn't. It's about the community. How can we as a community work together to better to respond to these incidents? So within the mental health unit in St. Paul, we have our mental health resource team, and that's where our external partners become engaged. So right now, our team within the department consists of the police department, People Incorporated, Regions Hospital, and Ramsey County. I started this conversation over 2 years ago with some of our partners to say, let's work on that changed response. And the 2 partners that held their hand up first were People Incorporated and Regions Hospital say, let's try this. Let's see what this would look like. And they dedicated resources to our team at no cost to the city to start this process of that changed response. Amber Ruth is from People Incorporated, and Kara Haroldson is from Regions Hospital. And what do? We've taken 2 national best practices with police mental health collaborative programs. So we've built a hybrid program in St. Paul. And it consists of case management. And case management is that aftercare. So the crisis has occurred, a police officer has responded, written a report, and then what's next? Well, what's next? We see what was done at the time of the crisis, what resources were engaged in to say what else can be done, who else should be at this table, who else should be engaged. Sometimes we are, in the police department, gatekeepers of information. We may have contact with somebody, let's just call him John Doe, and we have contact with them when they're in crisis. And we don't know that John is also connected with an agency for mental health services. So we can look at it on the back end to say, oh, John is connected with Guild or MHR or People Incorporated, and then we can call them and say, hey, just so you know, we had contact with John. Someone might want to go out and check on him to see if they're doing okay. Or we can follow up afterwards and we can call. I'm reminded of a call back during the pilot project in 2017 in the Eastern District. I was working a normal patrol officer job, and then in the spare time I would do mental health follow-up. And I called this gentleman, and it was simply, he had had a crisis the night before. I'd called the next day just to check in with him. And it took me a long time to explain what I was doing. I essentially was just calling to say, how are you doing today? I know you had the police there last night. You didn't have to leave your house. I'm just checking in on you. And once he finally understood the purpose of my phone call, he started to cry. And after we got through that, I asked him, why are you crying? What's going on? He said he'd never had anybody in his life call just to say, how you doing today? Now, should your police department have to do that? Should your police officers have to do that? Probably not, right? But this citizen's needs and expectations were not getting met anywhere else. And so if we can connect with that person who is in crisis to follow up with them to make sure that they engage with resources, maybe they won't have to call the police in the future. And that's great. So that's case management. The other piece is that CoResponder program. So the benefit here is we have, and this is where the question comes back earlier, we partner our mental health officer that has specialized training with the licensed clinical social worker to go out and respond to the crisis at the time of the crisis. So what happens is we get that 911 call. Our officers go out, de-escalate, stabilize the situation, make it safe. And then they call for the mental health officer who responds with the licensed clinical social worker. It brings the expertise to the call to make a more informed decision. Does the person truly need to go to the hospital for stabilization? Or can we put together a safety plan, get them connected with services, and be able to keep them in their environment, in their home, whatever that looks like? So that's more in progress. So those are the two national best practices that we've built into our program here. There's data, of course. Data tells the story of success or failure sometimes. And I think, do we have enough data to say that this is an amazing program and we need to keep going on this? I think it's going to take some time. My argument is absolutely. I know the individual stories of success and life impacts, and I can talk about those. But as far as data, I think it's going to be a while before we can show maybe a decrease in calls for service because of this program. What I can tell you is there was 1,565 cases referred to mental health in 2018. Sorry, that's really bugging me, isn't it? And of those, we have some specific information. If we look at the bottom, 39% of those cases involve people that self-disclosed a mental health diagnosis, 39%. That number's already grown to 44% for 2019. And why is that? I think part of it is because we've demonstrated that we can be trustworthy stewards of information. We can get people connected with services. So individuals are more likely to disclose to us what's going on in their lives and that they need help. They need to engage with services. Yes?
What is the, I'm sorry if I missed it, could you speak to what specifically is the special training for the officers in the mental health unit and how it compares to force-wide training?
Good question. So the question was, what's the specialized training that the mental health officers are receiving? So all officers in St. Paul are going through crisis intervention team training, which is a 40-hour course on de-escalation and crisis intervention skills. It's skill building and it's also education on mental health. So that's 40 hours. In addition, the mental health officers go through an enhanced CIT. We're one of very few agencies that have developed an enhanced program in mental health programming, and that's called enhanced CIT. Besides that, we have ongoing training through People Incorporated. They run a training program and other training that we can find. So it's ongoing. And then what's nice is I've seen some of our staff have actually seeked out training on their own and bring that to my attention.
Who conducts the enhanced training? Is it not People Incorporated or who does?
Good question. So the ECIT, well, CIT is a collaborative training program. I think we're at 16 different entities that come in during the 40 hours to help provide that training. And it's the same thing for ECIT. For those 2 days, we're bringing outside expertise in to train with us.
2 days extra training, sorry.
I'm sorry?
It was 2 days for the ECIT.
Correct. That's correct. Oh, what I've been asked is that we wait for the questions till the breakout sessions. Please remember your questions, though. All right, so the future of mental health programming. So we were awarded a planning grant that we worked with Ramsey County to develop the program on. We were one of 16 agencies that were awarded, 16 agencies nationwide that were awarded the expansion grant, and that allows us a 3-year grant to bring in 2 more social workers. So we have our ones from Regions and People Incorporated. We're bringing 2 more in that will be working afternoons. So now we will develop a second shift for that CoResponder program. We also are bringing into our unit a homeless and unsheltered outreach program and a chemical dependency program that is called Recovery Access Program. So we're taking the information that we have and we're trying to get people connected with the services that they need, not only in mental health related, but chemical dependency and now the homeless and unsheltered population. So we're trying to make sure we provide the right services to those individuals as well. And that's what I have for you. That was really fast. I look forward to talking to you at breakout sessions. If you have questions, please, let's talk. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Sgt Sipes, for coming and presenting. I appreciate it, and I know you will get lots and lots of questions. Once again, my name is Constance Tuck. I'm the chair of the PCIARC, and I'm really excited to be here to share with you what the PCIARC is about and the plans that we have for the future, how we do our work, and how you might be able to support us. When I looked out, I was thinking, wow, I'm so happy. Winter is finally over. But for us Game of Thrones people, I will say it, winter is coming, literally and figuratively. But today, I want to focus on what we do and how we do our work. First of all, who we are. You've met the commissioners, but I wanted to talk a little bit about who we really are, other than our names and where we live. We really are the community's voice in reviewing and making recommendations to the St. Paul Chief of Police about complaints against St. Paul police officers. So when we have our full complement of commissioners, there are 9 of us. And all of us go through quite a bit of training as well. I would say well over 40 hours of training that we go through between the Civilian Police Academy and all of the other types of trainings that we have to have, including training on data privacy, training relating to diversity, training relating to appropriate workplace behavior, and so forth. And all of us are appointed by the mayor with the approval of city council. There is a process, and there were some handouts out front, and I'll talk about it at the very end for those who are interested in joining our ranks. Oops, I don't see my clicker. Oh, okay. Thanks. So how do we go about doing our work? Well, as you can imagine, because we represent diverse perspectives, we come from very different backgrounds, we have different personal ideologies. We certainly don't always see things the same way, and we have had some very lively discussions. We will often disagree. Sometimes we will change our minds. Other times we won't. But we always disagree respectfully with each other, you know, especially if we have a really knockdown, drag-out disagreement. Afterwards, folks will come up to each other and say, hey, I heard you, I just don't agree with you. And we always try to keep in mind that we need to be fair and objective to both parties in the complaint. So we consider not only whether an officer followed the letter of the law or the letter of the policy, but we also consider how he or she conducted him or herself with the person who filed the complaint. Were they respectful? Did they de-escalate a situation when it was appropriate to do so or possible? Were they reasonable in their interactions with the person who was complaining? And we also consider similar factors when we look at the complainant's behavior as well. So we always have a balance that we try to go through when we're trying to decide a particular case. And we are also very sensitive to ongoing concerns about police encounters with African American members of the African American community and other non-majority communities. And we're very much aware of the history of some very tragic encounters that resulted from those interactions. And we are also aware that police work can be very difficult, very stressful, and sometimes dangerous. So we consider all of those factors, and then we make our decision based on the standard of preponderance of the evidence. In other words, is something more likely than not, whether or not it occurred. And once we reach a decision, and again, it's not always unanimous, but we do go by majority rule. Once we make our decision, we communicate our recommendations to the chief, and the chief, by law, has the final word on how a complaint is going to be handled and whether or not there will be discipline and what the nature of that discipline will be. So, having told you a little bit about who we are and how we operate, I want to spend a little bit more time talking about what we have accomplished so far and what our plans are for the future. The PCIARC, as many of you may or may not know, was reconstituted back in October of 2017. The statute was changed in early 2017 to remove representatives from the police department from the PCIARC, to increase the number of PCIARC commissioners to 9, and then to take the PCIARC from under the auspices of the police department and place it under the Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity Office, which is where it is today. And you met Deputy Director Martin and also our new interim director who was here tonight as well. So with all that in mind, those of us who became part of this new commission after about a year decided we needed to kind of take a step back and look and see what should we be doing? What were we doing right? What could we improve on? How might we want to move forward? So we set about looking at 6 different areas of focus, and we identified those, and they are there for you on the slide. And we also developed action steps for each one of those areas, but we all realized it was a lot to do. And so I like to think of the work that we're going to do as kind of sprints and marathons. And because it's a lot to get done. So the first area, the case intake and review, One of the things that we need to do is to clarify the roles for reviewing and accounting for complaints and making sure that everyone is on the same page. The ordinance is a little ambiguous in some places, and we need to clarify that. And so far, one of the things that we have done is we identified the fact that we wanted to make sure that police officers who are part of our community understand the PCIARC process, and we also wanted to look at getting accurate information about the PCIARC that is available on officers' business cards. And so we're going to be looking at doing that over the next year. Some officers have the information, some don't. Some of the information is outdated, and so we want to work on that. And that is kind of a sprint that we're hoping to do. Under community outreach, we realize that we want to connect with more of our communities and expand their awareness about PCIARC. And this meeting is one of the ways that we do it. We do it once a year. Ideally, we'd like to have more opportunities to do that. One of the things that we did, because people were saying, well, we don't understand what is PCIARC and what do you do and what does that stand for? Why is that weird acronym? And so we developed a purpose statement, just a one-pager, and some frequently asked questions about PCIARC. And I was not paying attention, Jeff. Were those on the screen when folks came in or not?
The statement was.
The statement was, okay. We will put those, if it's not already on our website, we'll get them up. We also have frequently asked questions about PCIARC. And we wanted to make those available to the community. So that's something we've already done. One of the things that we would like to work on is to expand the PCIARC's event participation and develop a more targeted marketing campaign, and particularly for the youth and those for whom English is not their first language. So we are going to be requesting some additional funding to work on that. The next thing, policy review and recommendations. We have developed a process for reviewing policies and making recommendations for change, and I'm talking about policies relating to police conduct and the policy manual. So we have been given the opportunity to give feedback on changes to one of the police department's policies that had to do with engaging with individuals who identify as transgender. And we hope to be able to do that for other policies going forward. And we're trying to identify policies that show up consistently in our complaints, so we can look at those and see if maybe they need to be changed. Because in some cases, sometimes officers get confused about what they should be doing, and community members do too, what expectations are. Community meetings. We'd like to have more opportunities to get input from the community, as I just mentioned. One of the reasons that we moved our annual summit to April, and some of you, I don't know if you came to the 2018 annual summit, was just in November. So we were really ambitious and decided we wanted to have the 2019 annual summit starting in the spring, because it was just a better time for everyone. The fall, everyone was busy, and also we didn't have a complete data set for the entire calendar year, so we thought it made more sense to do that, and so that's why we're holding this summit now. So we, again, as a marathon, would like to hold a couple more meetings each year to get your input and also update you on any policy recommendations and get your feedback. But again, we're going to be asking for some more resources to do that. And ongoing training for commissioners. Remember, I mentioned that we all go through quite a bit of training, and a lot of that is mandatory. The trainings, the over 40 hours that I mentioned is mandatory, but there are also trainings that would help us to do a better job in terms of our oversight work and in understanding best practices and how we might be able to do our work differently. So we have had this past fall, 2 of our commissioners and our coordinator and Jeff attended a national civilian oversight training. We are hoping that eventually all commissioners who want to attend such trainings would be able to go. And also we're trying to look at ways in which some of those mandatory trainings that we have could be done online, because it's very difficult when you have 9 people and you're trying to schedule things for all of their scheduled trainings that everyone can make it to at the same time. And also everyone, I forgot to mention, we're all volunteers on the commission, so taking time away for those additional trainings is quite an ask, and so we want to find ways of doing that more efficiently. And then collaboration with additional organizations who do the same kind of work is something that we also want to do, but that is one of those marathon things that I think we need to take care of some of the others before we get to. So, if you are interested in supporting the PCIARC, you can do one of these things listed here. I hope that perhaps I've gotten some folks who would be willing to join us. I hope I haven't scared you away by telling you how much work we do. But there are some flyers on the table with additional information about the Civilian Police Academy training, because everyone who is a commission member has to complete that training as well as the others. And we do have an academy that's beginning on April 26th. It's a special one. It's going to meet one Friday a month all day in April, May, June, and July. But typically the academies meet once a week in the evenings for about 3 hours, and it goes on for about 10 weeks. But I would say stay in touch with the Police Department Community Engagement Unit. That number and their website is right up there if you are interested. And also, of course, you can go to the PCIARC website itself to get additional information. So I hope that I've given you some additional insight into who we are and how we operate. And I want to thank you once again for coming out and for your attention.
Thank you, Chair Tuck. So now we're going to move into the big portion of this meeting, which is the breakout sessions, where we allow an opportunity for community members to provide feedback, ask any questions they may have of the commission, as well as the community engagement unit and the internal affairs unit. Commissioners have name tents, and they'll be scattered throughout this room as well as potentially the overflow room. So we'll have about 30 minutes. We'll try and work through these guided questions. So if you have any thoughts on the strategic plan, you have any questions about the summary data, or the mental health unit, or just any questions in general about the PCIARC, this is your time to ask, and we'll have note takers there to collect this data, and we'll provide a forum later on in the year to capture what was happening at these tabling sessions. Yep, so we'll do that, and we'll come back in about 30 minutes. One of the major emphasis of this event is really to capture community feedback. We want to know, answer you all's questions, understand how the community, get some of the concerns and a general consensus on what the community thinks about the PCIARC, this process, where there may be some either misinformation or some misunderstandings. And we always love that our commissioners can engage with different community members and voice their concerns and hear them firsthand. So some of the themes from the breakout session tables that I was able to collect were we wanted a more transparent process, such as more information on the timeline of the PCIARC process, just continuing to be updated. In addition to, PCIARC needs to be able to ask more questions of their complainants when they're providing a said statement. And there should be some sharing of ideas and having additional resources. Duly noted. We're also, another topic of conversation was racial profiling being a big concern, and why complainants that people who are arrested, are they able to initiate a complaint, and what is the process for them? So that's something that we will hope to get an answer to you guys back pretty soon. And the last one is improve outreach and accessibility, and really letting community members know that their small concerns really do matter. Thank you all for engaging with this process. Again, we really, really appreciate it. Now I have the distinguished honor of introducing our new director of the Human Rights Equal Economic Opportunity Department, Mrs. Toni Newborn. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Julian stated, my name is Toni Newborn. I am serving double duty right now, currently as the interim HERO director as well as the chief equity officer. I have the privilege of working for our mayor here in the mayor's office. I'm really excited about taking on this role, and I'm more excited about seeing you all here. One of the major changes that I have experienced in my almost 4 years' time of working for the city of St. Paul is the practice of authentic engagement that has been led and initiated by our mayor. And this event, the PCIARC Summit, is a product of that. Since 2018, since we've started, we've had a series of engagement events. We have asked the community to not only show up and complain and tell us what we should or should not be doing, but to give us direction as to what we should be doing as a city and to be a part of the decision-making process. And so this effort, this summit, is about that. It's about you being a part of the decision-making process and to hold us accountable for it. And the mayor will talk about the series of events that we've done recently in which our community members have said they want a St. Paul in which they feel welcome, in which they feel included, and more importantly, in which they feel safe. And so the PCIARC Commission, our internal affairs, our officers are committed to ensuring that we have a safe community, we have a safe St. Paul. But we need your help. We need your input, we need your direction, we need your insight. And so I hope that you continue to stay engaged and to, again, hold us accountable for the changes that you said you wanted to see happen here in our community, and become actively involved in it. It's not just the people, the staff members here, the mayor's office, the communication team, myself, our investigators. It requires you as well to be a part of this change and to make a St. Paul in which we feel welcome, included, and safe. For that, again, thank you for being here, and I have the opportunity to introduce our mayor, Mayor Carter. I would like to invite you to the podium here. We'll give him a round of applause.
Appreciate that. Good evening. It sounds like you guys have had quite a productive evening, and I appreciate you all being here. As Tony mentioned, this is part of our sort of engagement ethic that we have in our administration. Everything that we do, our goal is to do it through what I think of as kind of 3 degrees of engagement. The first is you deserve to know what I think and what I feel and what my plans are for the city. But as we kind of dig into that, how will I be able to know how to guide this great city, this full city, this diverse city, this incredible city without hearing from you first, right? And how will any of us have informed perspective beyond the tip of our nose without really engaging with each other and hearing from each other? And so this is an event to incorporate all 3 of those elements, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. We're learning a lot, frankly. We're learning about ourselves, we're learning about our city, we're learning about each other. So everything we do through this type of process. This past year, as we set up our budget, our city budget, we did this type of process, and it's apropos for this time of year, because this time last year, as we were starting to kind of head into our budget process, it sort of syncs up with the time that the snow starts to melt. And you know, in Minnesota, the snow starts to melt and it uncovers potholes. Maybe you know that, maybe you're aware of that. And I remember thinking as we were entering our budget process, we gotta just like put a bunch of money into filling potholes. And the incredible thing that happened, one thing that I learned about the city through this type of engagement, we had our budget events all over the city, and in neighborhood after neighborhood, people said, well, wait a minute, potholes aren't the problem, potholes are a symptom of the problem. Potholes are there because we haven't invested in our streets in the way that we need to. And if we just spend money and time and energy chasing potholes, well, then our children will have more potholes to fill. If we repave our roads, if we invest in our streets and our infrastructure, we need a strategy that will give our children fewer potholes to fill. And that really excited me. I say that to say this, that's also the thinking that goes into our community first public safety framework for our city. Our perspective on public safety is, I think, a little bit different than what the historic perspectives on public safety have been. One of the things that I shared in my State of Our City address last month is that traditionally, I think many of the, and I heard Director Newborn say, that our goal is to build a community, to build a city where every person in every part of our city can feel welcome, can feel safe, can feel included in our local economy. And that's a shift, because traditionally, frankly, that hasn't really been our strategy. As people come back into our community from incarceration, for example, our driving goal hasn't necessarily been to ensure that they can feel welcome in our communities. It hasn't necessarily been to ensure that they feel included in our economy. It hasn't been to ensure that they feel safe, but it's been more of about maybe drawing a circle and identifying the folks inside that and doing everything we can to keep them protected from the people who are outside of the circle. You know what I'm talking about? And so we've decided that's not good enough for our city. And we've laid out this community first public safety framework, which really sits on 3 core principles, research-based principles, and principles that we've heard from St. Paul residents. The first is that people who have access to opportunity, who have a good job, who can afford to put food on the table and pay the rent, are much less likely to become either an offender or a victim. The second is the places in our community. When we invest in place, right? The physical character and the aesthetic quality of a place has everything to do with the type of behaviors and outcomes that occur within. For example, when we feel safe in our neighborhoods, right? What do? We go cook out on the front lawn. We borrow sugar from our neighbors, and we draw hopscotch on our sidewalks. And suddenly there's no room for somebody to come and act out in ways that we don't like. When we don't feel safe, we do the opposite. We go in our homes and we close our blinds and we get big privacy fences, and all of a sudden we're conceding our blocks. The third principle, which is critical, and this is again research driven, is that people who trust that they will be treated fairly by law enforcement are more likely to obey the law. They're more likely to call 911 an emergency, and they're more likely to participate and cooperate in an investigation so that we can actually solve things that happen in our city. This is a perspective that says we got to get beyond chasing or just simply reacting to crime and say, how do we prevent crime in the first place? How do we really create, working together, a safer city? So I say all that to say that this work here, the work of our PCIARC, and thank you so much, Chair Tuck and all the members of the PCIARC who are here, your work is critical. Your work is absolutely critical to keeping our city safe, to ensuring that we as a community know that we have a public safety framework that erases that circle. That we have a public safety framework that aims to keep us all safe. That we have a public safety framework that aims to welcome and include all of us. And I will tell you this, the reason we need this community first framework is because people ask me all the time, where in the country, where can we look to a police department that's doing this stuff well? And I will tell you, the answer that I give them is the St. Paul Police Department. Our department, I know you heard a little bit about our mental health work a little bit earlier. That's really critical. That's exciting to me. That's important to me. We've expanded our community engagement division. And even with all of that work, we know that unless we're connecting people to opportunity, unless we're ensuring that people have access to housing, unless we're ensuring people have access to just a high quality of life, we'll sort of constantly be chasing our tail. So that's why that work is so important to us. Our city, and I know our chief was here and I appreciate him being here. Our city attorney's in the room as well, and I hope you're aware of her work right now. City Attorney Lindsay Olson, thank you for being here. We're working right now to build the Neighborhood Justice Program, which is, they've been traveling all over the country, seeing how other cities do this. And our plan is to create essentially a restorative justice process to divert low-level, first-time nonviolent offenders away from criminal prosecution. That's exciting to me. That's groundbreaking work, and that's critical work that we'll continue to push and move going forward. I appreciate your work. You know, listen, and I know we have members of our Hero Commission in the room as well. I appreciate your work. You know, this challenge, and I know the hour is late and I want to get out of your way, but this challenge that we've taken on as a city, to say we're going to build a city that works for all of us. One, that statement ought to always be a reminder to us that our city doesn't always work for all of us. And in fact, there are those of us who have spent much of our lives feeling like our city infrastructure, the system, has worked against us, at least every bit as much as it's worked for us. But here's the deal. I'm one of those Rondo families. You know, my grandfather owned over a half a dozen commercial properties on Old Rondo that were taken from us when I-94 was built. What I think is, you know, I don't imagine there was anybody in some dark smoke-filled room trying to figure out how to undermine the African American community. I think what's more likely is somebody said, we really want a freeway and maybe we'll build it here. And some community with agency and power stood up and said, no, not here, that's us. And they said, well, maybe we'll build it here. And some community with agency and power stood up and said, no, you can't build it there, that's us. And then they found a community whose agency and power had been stripped from it. And that's where they were able to build that freeway. The moral of the story for me is this. In St. Paul, in Minnesota, in the United States, tragically and embarrassingly, we can still more accurately predict a child's expected life outcomes based on her race and her zip code than we can based on how hard she works. That's unacceptable, but we have to ask ourselves why. And the premise that we're moving forward with in our administration is that our disparities are the inevitable. You know, we often talk about disparities and poverty and inequity as though it's like, you know, an act of God, right? It's a snowstorm or a flood. Like there's really nothing you can do about it. It's just the way the world is. But they're man-made, and that's important to know. They're man-made through decades and generations of policy and resource decisions that have been made without all the voices at the table. So you getting engaged, you plugging in, you getting involved is the only way that we can move this forward. Even with our first person of color to serve as mayor in St. Paul, the power to transform our city really belongs to all of you. So I want to thank the members of the PCIARC who are here. I want to thank the Hero Commissioners who are here. I definitely want to thank our officers and our city employees who are in the room. I appreciate your service. And I want to thank all of you for the revolutionary act of just being in space with each other and doing the hard, difficult, challenging, and sometimes uncomfortable work of saying we are going to build this community together. We are going to ensure that it works for everybody. We are going to build our community first public safety framework, and we are going to do this work together. I'm honored to be your teammate in the work, and forever grateful for your time and energy spent here tonight. Thank you.